Welcome back, everyone, for this new episode. I'm with my amazing co-host, Zara.
Hello.
And this week, we're with Cari, the author of Breath and some other books too. But this week, we will talk more about the upcoming novel. So, hello, Cari, and can you share the title?
Yes, it's called Unbreakable.
The title is Unbreakable. Can you introduce us to the main character, please?
Oh, well, there's three main characters in it. There are two who share one side of the story, and they are Ellen and Grace. Ellen is a, let's just say, a mystery woman who gets herself in quite a lot of trouble and ends up kidnapping Grace. She sustains a bullet wound before the novel even starts. So she's injured right from the start. And Grace is a doctor who works for the HEM service down in London, which is, they tend to be the helicopter medics, but they also get, because it's London, the helicopter doesn't get used all that much from what I could establish. So they use the cars, like the rapid response cars, like a regular ambulance service. So she's one of the doctors who works on that. So they share one side of the story, and then the other side of the story is Safia Faris, who is a detective working for the London Met, and she is responsible for sort of like untangling the mystery that Ellen and Grace are involved in. So there's basically two of them, a dead body, and Safia, and the story is untangling how the hell all that came to, how it all came to be, and what's going to happen next, and you know, how it all unravels, basically. And it does unravel quite dramatically. So, yeah.
So before we get into the story, you said on social media that the cover of Unbreakable is one of your favorite covers ever.
It came out really nicely, actually. It was a picture that, because both strokes are doing this thing now where you get quite a lot of say in your covers, whereas right at the start, I kind of got two, say like for Snowbound, I got two options and it was like, pick one of those. And now it's far more of a give and take kind of process within reason, but they will give you the opportunity to go on to things like Getty Images, a couple of the image sites that they use. And if you've got a particular cover that you like or a particular image that you like, you can put it into your cover kind of preferences, basically. So for something like Alias, I really wanted a woman on the cover of that. So I was able to say, for this one, because it's usually, I absolutely don't want a woman on the cover of it. But for this one, I wanted a picture of the protagonist for Alias because it was her story, essentially. So I didn't actually find that picture, that was found for me, but I was able to guide them in that way. Breathe, I found the heart trace and put that through, and they actually matched it from an image site that they used because I'd found it on a different site. And then Unbreakable, I just had this idea of such a difficult sort of book to encapsulate in an image. I mean, there's so much going on in it, but the image of the hands and the grip is a really good one. So I just had that in my mind, basically. So I went online and I found it, and it's good. I don't know whether you can see it clearly on this. There's just this really good grip here. So it's not like a romantic hold, it's a hold for dear life hold. And that was, I really left, those fingerprints are going to leave some imprints, basically. So that's why it's a really strong image. So that's why I forwarded that and they just used it. And then the background was put on it by the actual ball stroke artist. So.
What's the background of?
It's just kind of, it's almost like a sunset coloured. I think the original one was just black and white, and it was just really bland. So it got sent back, and then she's come up with a sort of stormy, almost like a stormy sky at night kind of image. So yeah, it's coloured. It was really weird because one of the colours I'm like, don't put pink on it. You know, it's not a romance. Don't put hearts and flowers on it. It's actually really pink, but it does work well for the book. So yeah, it's my pinkest cover.
But not your pinkest story, I'm guessing.
Absolutely not my pinkest story.
Where did the idea for Unbreakable came from?
Well, it's a bit of a twisted tale that began with a story basically being abandoned. I was writing something else. I mean, I have told the story. I think it's been mentioned on my blog. I was writing something else and it just wasn't working for me. And the pandemic hit, and I think I got too tangled up in this story and kind of trying to plan it because I wanted it to be a series, and I got too bogged down in sort of like trying to sort out everybody's characters and background, and it wasn't flowing. Basically, I liked it, but it wasn't working for me. I didn't want to write it at the time. I think I wanted something simpler. I mean, the idea for Unbreakable is not original. It's an injured person kidnapped a medic. It's been done. I can probably name 2 or 3 TV shows. Even ER have done it. The Terminator Sarah Connor Chronicles has done it. They've all had that kind of one of our leads gets taken hostage by somebody who wants a gun job running fit. So it's not original. It's just what you do with it. You have to put your own spin on it, and that's what I've done with Unbreakable. But it was just a kind of good, nice, high concept. It was kind of like Alias in a way, because that also came out of that kind of big bang high concept. There's an injured woman in a car with a dead woman. How did that all come to be? And these stories, they tend to sort of like, they start off with me flirting through the first sort of like 10,000 words because they're really easy to write. And then sort of like going, oh, hell, I'm better put some plot out. So that was with Alias, the first 8,000 words were done probably in a few days, and that is really unlike me. I'm not a fast writer. So with Unbreakable, it was similar. I had that idea, and it was just fun to write. And it was easier than the series because it was a standalone. So I really like the characters in it, and I really like the development of the characters, but it didn't involve as much sort of like unpicking of their background as the one that I abandoned, which I've since picked up on writing. So that is back being my work in progress now. So it wasn't put in the bin, it was just put on hold, basically.
I heard you narrate the opening chapter of Unbreakable in the BSB Book Fest, and it's really tense. Yeah, and in a lot of your books as well, your characters get into really sticky situations. So do the characters ever turn around to you and say, please give us a break?
Please, no more.
Yeah.
They did get a break. They just don't right at the end. Bless them. It's always, my books are always this kind of horrible traumatic. It's sort of like 87,000 words, and then the 88,000 will be the end where they either get to have sex or get a happy ending or whatever. So that kind of follows from Unbreakable only. I think this is probably worse because it's just this ongoing kind of, I mean, once the ball starts going, it doesn't really stop. And you've got sort of like Ellen and Grace having one sort of like part of this story where they're being sent on this, not a wild goose chase, but kind of almost like a road trip. So they start off in London and they end up in the Saddleworth Moors. And Safia is, she's based down in London, and she's with her partner Suds, her mate on the fort, and they're sort of like, they're always playing catch up. So yeah, once, like I say, the pace doesn't really let up in this one. It was a really good one to write. Sometimes I'm sort of like writing a book. I think Quiet Death was like that, because I got to a point in A Quiet Death, I thought, I better put some action in here. So we had a raid of like a brothel in the middle of A Quiet Death it was basically born out of a need for me to stick a bit of action in a story that was plodding a little bit, I think. So there was no need for me to sort of like manufacture any kind of chase or like upping the tension in Unbreakable, because it's just, it's a little bit relentless once it gets going, really. So I hope people are, if they're looking for a thriller, they'll really enjoy it. It is a thriller and a police kind of detective story, first and foremost.
I read that there are 2 reviews on Goodreads, and they both said that once you pick it up, you cannot put it down.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm hoping for. That it is a page turner in the sort of like old-fashioned sense, and it's not. It doesn't really have chapters either. It's broken up into a timeline. So instead of having chapter 1, you will get the character name and the time and the day, basically, and that flirts around a little bit as well. It's not overcomplicated, the timeline, but sometimes what happens with Safia, if you look at the timeline, it's either happening at the same time as something that's just happened to Ellen and Grace, or maybe slightly before it even. So the timeline it's linear for the characters and not so deep. it's linear for like Ellen and Grace, and then Saphia, you know, might bounce around a little bit. So it isn't complicated. It's not like we're, you know, flashing forward and doing Doctor Who kind of shenanigans or anything like that.
So if it's not too spoilery, what's the time period of the book is set over? Like, is it months, days, weeks?
Oh no, it's days. No, it's a handful of days with an epilogue that jumps forward months to give a proper sort of resolution to the story and the relationships, basically. But no, how many days? Probably for the actual sort of like main part of it until it all kind of chills out a little bit. It's probably only about 3 days,
and does
if that.
Everyone make it to the end?
Sarah, come on now.
I'm trying.
When you say everyone, do I kill anybody? Yes, I think. Well, yeah, there's a dead body right at the start, so not everybody makes it out with a head, but most of them maybe do. It's so difficult to talk about this book because the one thing that I would say to people is try and avoid reviews, because you're always going to get somebody who thinks, "Ha, I've read it first, so I'm not going to spoil it for everybody." So yeah, I mean, I would really try, and it's not because the reviews are crap. The first early readers have been very positive about it, but it would be such a shame if you go into this and it's spoiled for people, because you don't really get any kind of idea of what's going on until. It's a good way in looking at the book. It's a good sort of like, you know, 10,000 words into it where you suddenly go, oh, crap. So, yeah, don't let that oh, crap twist be spoiled for you, basically.
What can you tell us that sounds the most spoilery, but it's not a spoiler?
I can tell you that it's so difficult. I can barely tell you anything. It's really annoying trying to talk about this book without actually talking about it. I can tell you that Safia's favourite chocolate is Toblerone.
Could be.
And that she has a stupid dog called Polly.
Oh.
And she's not sure whether that's because she loves Bollywood films or whether it's because she loves spaghetti bolognese. But yeah, it's really difficult to talk about Ellen and Grace's side of it because that's where all the spoilers would lie. I mean, they both have a really traumatic sort of past to deal with, which has been really good to sort of like to write and sort of like unpick, because you go into it, you would probably go into it thinking that Ellen is horrible and she's got her reasons, basically. So that is one thing I would say. Don't write Ellen off, you know, straight from the start. She does have her reasons for doing what I mean, you know, you kind of know from what I write, I'm not really going to write Ellen as my leads. Bear with her, basically. She has her reasons. But I can't spoil it.
No, of course. Character have trauma, but is it the kind of trauma, the kind of character that works to be better, or the kind of character that's excused themselves because of their trauma?
Grace's trauma is a personal one, whereas Ellen's is more to do with the career that she used to be in. So hers is more of a PTSD one, where she went through a really rough time, went completely off the rails, and then basically got her stuff together, and got herself together and came out the other side of it. So yeah, the traumas are completely different. Grace, with the two of them, if either of them, Grace is the one who's still struggling. She's the one who's not over what's happened to her. And weirdly, what happens with Ellen sort of like helps her work through. So you've got two sort of like characters who've been broken in the past, and one of them has picked up the pieces and moved on. One of them is still picking up the pieces, and you know, they end up in an ordeal that will rattle those pieces around a little bit and hopefully put them together.
So you have 3 leads: Safia, Ellen, and Grace. Do each of them get a POV?
Yes. Yeah, it's a triple point of view book. I started just writing it with 2. I started writing it with just Grace and Ellen, and then realised that wasn't going to carry the whole story through, because I needed a point of view that was outside of their story, essentially, which was where Sapphic came in. And she was only really supposed to have quite a minor role, and she's ended up at a good third of the book. Because her character was just fun to write, and I like the police procedural sort of side of writing thrillers as well. So her a sort of like partnership with, she's got Suds, who's her work partner, who's a good bloke. I like writing good blokes. I think lesbian fiction, loving women fiction needs more sort of like positive men in them. So I always go out of my way really to put a good bloke in my book. So he's a kind of Nelson sort of character. So their partnership is similar to Sanna and Nelson. It's quite a sparky and fun relationship. And then she's got her partner, her missus basically, Cami, who works for forensics. So she's a very handy person around, especially if you need your sort of like bullet wound analysing, quick. So so she's got her own sort of like her own story essentially. She's a very a major character in it, and then Ellen and Grace obviously have got a point of view each, and their scenes alternate. I think Grace ends up with the bulk of the first section, then you get to find out what's happened to Ellen, and then they alternate kind of quite fluidly. Then.
Which was the hardest POV to write?
Possibly Grace's. You kind of have to give her reasons not to just run away, because she certainly has opportunities to. So I needed to make her character reasonable and realistic without making her seem stupid. So, the first thing I did when I sent the what do you call it? You send this thing off to Boltroad. But I sent it in, and the first feedback I got back was, well, have you had Grace consider this, because she should be trying to escape this woman and blah blah blah. And I ticked all those boxes. To be fair, I'd already covered it, but it was quite tricky, sort of like giving her a reason to stay. You get to a point where it's very easy to give her a reason to stay, but certainly those first sort of like few sort of like sections where Ellen is obviously critically injured. And becomes less and less of a threat the worse she gets in terms of a physical condition. Making Grace not seem stupid, basically, by not just running out of wherever they end up, screaming blue murder sort of thing. She's a doctor at the end of the day, so she's got an oath, but, does that oath sort of like, does it still apply if somebody's holding a gun to you? It's that kind of thing. So she was a more difficult point of view, which was an interesting point of view as well. To write. They were all three of them were really good. I really enjoyed writing these women. They're good characters. They were interesting characters, and hopefully I got a lot of depth out of them, even though it's just one book rather than a series. Hopefully there's a lot of depth to them. Safia was just a joy. I would write her. I toyed with the idea of writing her in the story. She will probably certainly crop up in another book, because she has a friendship with a character in the book that I'm writing now. Because I'd already started it and abandoned it, I knew who the character was going to be, who the lead was. So she's called Jo Shaw, and she has a cameo essentially at the end of Unbreakable. She comes in because they head up into her turf. So I thought, well, that's convenient. Let's chuck Jo in the mix. So she's now got a friendship with Safia. So it would be nice and probably quite easier to bring Safi into the one that I'm writing at the moment. So I might well do, because I like her and I don't want to say goodbye.
Oh, that's nice.
So I was also quite tempted to do her sort of like almost like a prequel with her as an early story, how she got to be with her girlfriend, how her parents kind of reacted to her joining the police force, which is all hinted at in Unbreakable but doesn't get unpicked. So there's a lot of things that you could do with that.
So we might potentially have two books, one with Safia and then one with the one that you stopped writing. Yay.
Yes, yeah, basically. So my only difficulty with Safia is that she's based down in London, and I'm not right keen on.
So this is one of the things. This is one of the things. I think you need to explain.
Don't know London.
I think you need to explain to non-UK readers what the big deal is about setting a book in the south of England.
I live in the north, and never the twain shall meet. There's this huge gulf between the north and the south, and I'm very well known for being a bloody northerner and for writing in bloody northern. So yeah, it's quite unusual for me to start a book below the Watford Gap, which is like the dividing line. But yeah, this one does start in London. And to be fair, people shouldn't really struggle with the language in it. I know I got quite a lot of crap for Breathe being incomprehensible to some poor folks who didn't speak the lingo. But they shouldn't have that kind of issue with Unbreakable. There's some slang in it, but it's not impenetrable slang. It's easy.
Safia is your first woman of color main character, right, in your books? So how did you do the research for her character, and did you have to use sensitivity readers? Were you a bit worried about making sure that you're not stepping on their toes, as to speak?
Yeah, I was terrified,
Yeah.
basically. I know there's a lot of clamour. There's people who want to see more diversity in lesbian fiction, and then there's this absolute sort of terror of writing a character of colour because, you know, I'm a white woman. I'm scared of getting it wrong. But at the same time, I've always had quite a diverse cast. The Dark Peak books were set, you know, around the north, and it would be a lie basically to not have a diverse cast in them. So I've often had minor characters who've been, I mean, not so much black. I've had minor characters in the hospitals. Have always been Asian, black, some kind of, you know, ethnicity that's not basically white British. But Safia was she's my first lead. She's British Pakistani. And I haven't used a sensitivity reader for it. I did think about it. And then I was kind of caught up in who would I actually choose? I think a lot of the diversity and a lot of the people who sort of like, who are after the wider reach of ethnicity within the book, they tend to be Black American. And that tends to be the sort of like the ethnicity that is shown or is sought. And I think that will possibly be the easier one to get sensitivity readers for. Whereas British Pakistani don't have an awful lot of British Pakistani readers, I don't think. So I was careful with my research. I've done most of it online. I've been careful with the language that I've used. It's quite, I don't know whether I've used a Gouterdale free card because she's quite westernised. So she's kind of estranged from her family in that she's, since she got with her girlfriend, basically, there's not been much contact with her family. But in terms of language, things like food, I had great fun sort of like researching amazing things that she could eat with her girlfriend, who's, just to make things super complicated, she's Bengali. Just to throw an extra one into the mix. So yeah, she was just a really fun character to write. I hope I haven't got anything wrong. I hope I haven't written anything offensive. It helps sort of like working where I work. I work in a really diverse area. So I've got that real sort of privilege of going into homes, Pakistani homes, Bangladeshi homes. So I know sort of like how they look. I know how the people speak. I will never know everything. I don't ever pretend or profess to know everything. So yeah, there is always that nervousness of, oh God, what if I messed up? But hopefully she's a good character. And I think it's important that we include more women of colour in the books. It's just that you're always on a bit of a sticky wicket writing when you're a white woman. You just are. And there will be people, I'm sure, who will take issue with something that I've done. But hopefully not massive issues. I mean, you know, you do your best. But there will be people, it will never be, you know, she'll never be quite good enough. But hopefully she's a likeable character. She's a fun character. And she carries the book well. So I would love to play out with her again, basically. Her and Cami, they're both really good. You know, I had a lot of fun writing them, so it would be my pleasure to write them again.
You get a bad review because you used slang in a book.
Yeah, I think Breathe was maybe a bridge too far because there was quite a lot of local dialect. I mean, I've always chucked a load of sort of like slang into, I think, from No Good Reason onwards, really. And they're like northern kind of colloquialisms. I can't say that. I need to put my teeth in before I say that. But yeah, I use a lot of sort of like local dialect. So, you know, people won't eat a sandwich, they'll eat a butty, that kind of thing. And I think Breathe had a few people reach in for the dictionary or Wikipedia a few too many times. So I did get a little bit, yeah.
But slang is the beauty of the language and the culture.
Well, I think so. Maybe there's just a kind of happy medium where I don't make my books incomprehensible for people. And yeah, I mean, you don't want to chuck a reader out the story. But to be fair, Unbreakable is my 9th book now. So Breathe was my 8th. So by then, I think people should really be used to it, and it shouldn't be a surprise. And it did seem to be a surprise to some people. But it worked. I will say it worked really, really well on audio Breathe. So if people were struggling with it, or think they might struggle with it, I would recommend the audio, because the narrator is from around these parts and can just make the dialogue sing. She's wonderful with the dialogue and the dialect. So yeah, it was a book that possibly worked even better on audio than it did on the page.
Good to know. I tried again.
Yeah, she did a really good job with it.
Earlier, you said that you shelved another story that is now your work in progress when the pandemic hit. So you wrote the draft, the edit, and now the release of Unbreakable in about a year and a half. Is that a normal time frame for you? Was it faster, longer?
I think it was probably a year. I think I'd probably done, because it's been 2 years now. I think it was September 2000, God, what year am I in? 2019, Breathe came out. So I'm just taking myself back a decade.
We use a new timeline. Pre-COVID, past COVID. So now
you're messing with timelines. I'm messing with timelines on the podcast now. But we did, this has been a two year and 1 month gap, I think. But I think I'd spent probably about 6 months with the first story. And then Unbreakable probably took about a year to write, which is pretty much on my average. And then, because I'm a bad person, I don't send that little thing into bold strokes like I should. I mean, the way that authors should do it is they send that off and then they get it approved. Bold strokes say, yeah, we'll have a book. And then you get things like a deadline. And then they start sort of like asking you for titles and covers. And I am never at a point where I can, A, work to a deadline, they terrify me. And B, like covers and titles. I'll be doing that while I'm only 50,000 words into a word. I mean, authors can. A lot of authors can. This is the way that normal authors do it, but I just can't, especially with the shifts and deadlines. It means that basically I have to wait for slot. So once I send in the little thing that I should send in, months before, once I send that in and get it approved, then I get my deadline, then I get to slot on the publication schedule. And yeah, I can't remember how long it was. I got a deadline, and then I got a deadline I was happy with at the stage that I was writing, where I was writing Unbreakable, and then you get, like an autumn time slot. So I agreed to that, basically.
So if there's a gap between when you finished writing and then the book being published, do you actually start writing or planning another book in that time period, or is it too difficult?
I do, but it can be really difficult. I already have this one on the back burner that I'd abandoned, so I picked that up again, and I was making some progress with that, and then you get things like your edits come back. And then after the edits, you get the proofs. So, I find it really difficult to switch off, and then you have to publicise it and try and persuade people to read it, and I've got a couple of blogs that I've written about it. So I find it quite hard to detach from a book until it's out. And until those reviews are in, you've had the first sort of like people saying whether or not they want to throw bricks at you or bouquets at you. And then I can kind of switch off. So I'm pretty much at that stage now. I've not had the bricks or the bouquets yet, but I'm kind of at that stage now where I can concentrate on another story because the edits are done and the proofs are done. I am going to work through the audio, I think, so that'll be my next thing. Because Nicky's doing the audio, Nicky Vincent is doing the audio again. And she likes sort of like sending it as and when to the author. So hopefully we'll be working through that together. So I've heard the first, each gave me a 15-minute sample to yay on, and we've had a chat about that. But Safia wasn't in the first 15 minutes, so I don't know what her voice will be like. So she's already said that we can work through it basically as she's recording it. She prefers that. She finds it easier than getting like a massive correction right at the end to go through and have to start putting in place. So that'll be fun. So
Nicky Vincent has narrated your last 4 books from the Dark Peak series, right? That's the one she started narrating.
She's done all of mine but Snowbound.
So has the way you collaborate with her changed over time?
Yeah, absolutely. Desolation Point, Tumble Down, and all of the Dark Peak series. I had nothing to do with those. I wasn't involved. I wasn't involved with Snowbound. They told me they got a decent narrator, and that was it. And then they switched to Nicky for all of those books, and I didn't listen to them for months and months. I think my missus listened to them, and she eventually said, "This narrator is really good. You should give them a go." I'd never been an audiobook listener. I found it quite disconcerting. I preferred to just read with, the regular way. And I listened to A Quiet Death while I was coming home from holiday, because I've got a terror of flying, basically. So I just plugged myself into my earphones and let it distract me, and it was really good. So obviously I've gone back and I read, I listened to them all, and then I've got friendly with Nicky. And then the Protest for Alias was much more collaborative. And Breathe, again, we were chatting and WhatsApping and whatnot while that was going on. And I proofed Breathe, which was good. That was, and any mistakes that are in Breathe are my fault, sort of thing. And I'll do the same for Unbreakable. But yeah, it's much more of a two-way kind of process now, rather than me listening to something terrified 6 months down the line. But yeah, I'm not a director or anything. I don't have anything to do with how she portrays the characters, how she delivers the lines. She has total responsibility for that, and I've got every faith that she'll be able to hit that, on the nail. She's a brilliant voice actress. She's able to, individualize every character. You never have any kind of issues telling them apart. And she's just a joy to listen to. Some of the things that she does with the dialogue, I didn't even think of. She'll put a spin on lines that I didn't intend, but they might work better, sort of thing. I'll check the stuff for mistakes, but I won't say, actually, you've got that line wrong. I didn't want it delivering like that. That is not what I'm there for. I've got faith that she'll be fine with that.
Is producing an audiobook something that you feel is a must in the industry, or do you do it for pleasure?
Well, it's not an author kind of thing. Your book is chosen basically by Boltrodes. If they think it will sell, it'll go on to audio. And I mean, audiobooks have become a massive thing within sort of like the gay writing. Basically, it's a huge boom industry, but they're expensive to produce. So not every book goes to audio. I mean, I'm fortunate, and I think it's part of the fact that I've stuck with Nicky and she's stuck with me, is that we've become known for being a good team. So, I don't know what mine would do if we switched to a different narrator, and possibly not as well, because Nicky can, like I say, she knows the accent, she knows the dialect around here, and she's a damn good voice actress. So she makes the books better. Basically, she does do a really good audio version. I've got to the point now where I will sell far better in audio than I will in paperback. So my sales are now sort of Kindle, audio, and paperback. They're certainly a popular format. But no, it's nothing to do with author choice, and we don't sort of the production costs are bold strokes.
I know that production cost explode when you do translation. Do you think it's something you will try to do someday, or is it just too expensive for your market?
How on earth would you translate my books? I think that, to be fair, that is quite a serious question. How on earth would you translate my books into German or French or Spanish or whatever other language when people sometimes struggle to read them in English? How would you get that? How would you get that flavour, the sort of the local flavour, to translate into German? I know some of the Boltrodes authors have had translations, and to be fair, to be honest, I have no idea how those have come about, whether it's something that they sorted out themselves or whether it's something that Boltrodes have done. But it doesn't seem to be something that they're moving towards with any kind of regularity. And so they're big hitters, and I don't count myself amongst those big hitters. They might see a translated version. I've got readers, around the world, which is lovely. They all seem to manage, I don't know how, to read me in English. So yeah, I can't see it. I can't see translations being a thing.
Did you always knew you wanted to be an author, that it would be part of your life?
I went to kind of a strange school. My primary school was quite an odd school. I don't think they get away with it these days with national curriculum, but it wasn't really geared around, your kind of set subject. It was quite arty, and it was quite, it's almost like liberal kind of ethos to it. So it was really creative. I enjoyed writing bill backers way back as a kid. I was always coming up with stories. I've always had a good imagination. I've always been into TV and media. And then, like a lot of lesbian writers, I ended up writing fan fiction, which was the first. Yeah, that would have been the first sort of like proper writing that I did, that I shared with anybody, that actually got read by anybody else. So I started that at university, which was when I found X-Files fanfic, and wrote one for the X-Files, and then didn't write anything else for quite a long time. Wrote a couple of tiny little Buffy ones. And then my main ones for Sarah Connor, the Terminator TV show, and Rizzoli and Isles. All of around the same time that I was writing Snowbound, really. So yeah, it wasn't that fanfic. I was kind of writing fan fiction, then kind of stopped writing fan fiction and started writing original fiction. I've never published any of my fanfics. They're all on the archives still. And none of my characters are from, like, they're not resolving kind of loans or anything like that. It was really weird because I was sort of like arts or science, because I didn't know whether I was going to go into medicine at A-level, and then my theatre studies. The woman who did my careers advice from the college that I ended up going to, she was a theatre studies tutor and ended up sort of like steering me towards doing theatre studies and English lit. But then I came back around to medicine in a way anyway, so I got the best of both worlds, really. I got the paramedic career and, got to write on the side. So that was nice. It worked out well. Accidentally, but it worked out well.
So Snowbound was 2011, and Unbreakable is now 2021.
10 years, wow.
What's changed in your writing process? Has anything changed? Has anything remained the same?
I've got better, I think, definitely. Looking back at Snowbound and Desolation Point, there's definitely bits that I would take a big red pen to and redo. In terms of the process, I write the same. I write longhand, I write out in the back garden, and I edit the sort of like, my wife beaters for me. We hash it out on the computer and it goes in. But in terms of the way that I write, I've pared down my writing. I don't use as many adjectives as I did. Nobody says things with a smile. The little cliches that kind of trip into a lot of writing that I've used myself and that I wouldn't use again. I think my writing is a lot more spare. I don't use 10 words when 3 will suffice. So I'm a cleaner, I think. I think I've got cleaner. And you just learn as you go along. I'm lucky because I've had the same editor with Ball Strokes for 10 years now. And we're at the point where, Unbreakable came back without a notes file, which is great. Every kind of author aspires to get a novel back without a notes file where there's nothing major that's come up that needs work. So it was just line editing on Unbreakable, misspellings or punctuation or something like that, and the odd word maybe that needed switching. But in terms of sort of like character and whatnot, I knew how the beats were going to work, and I'd done the due diligence on that really and got that right. So yeah, like I say, I've definitely progressed. I think I've matured as a writer, and I've got more courage, I think, to write what I want to write, because I know that there's quite a lot of people will read it, and that they like how I write and what I write genre-wise. Whereas I think early days I was still sort of like very conscious of, it's got to be a romance, it's got to have, a sex scene here and a kiss here and maybe a bit of a breakup or some kind of trauma or whatever. So Snowbound followed more of a traditional pattern in terms of the genre. And then I kind of threw away the norms with No Good Reason, and that's the one I think where I really branched out and did my own thing, and that worked out fine as well. So yeah, I got braver, I think, as a writer.
How much of yourself goes into the characters?
I think it depends who I'm writing, to be fair. I always tend to have a medic in there. But the only paramedic I've ever written has been Jem in Breathe, and it took me 8 books to write a paramedic. And even then, she was completely different to me. She was far sweeter than I am. She was, horrendous lack of fortune. She got all the bad jobs. She was just, I think I went out of my way basically to not make her a self-insert. I didn't want, some heroic, idealized paramedic striding in there and saving the day, because it's bollocks, and none of us are like that. And we all hate getting sweaty and dirty and going down, ditches to drag people out of water or God knows what. And it just doesn't happen. I mean, our job is boring a lot of the time. It's a great job, don't get me wrong, but, there are the bread and butter jobs that we get day in, day out. It's not a glamorous job. And anybody who writes a glamorous book about a paramedic has probably not been one for 20 years. So there's a lot of me in the characters, but they won't necessarily, it's more the sort of like the humour, I think, within the emergency services that I think translates really well into my writing. So, the sort of like the banter between the police and the hospital staff, that comes out of sort of like, experience. And I think you get a way of, using dialogue. I'm fortunate that I get to talk to loads of people from loads of different walks of life. We were talking about ethnicity earlier. I'll go into loads of different houses. I've got a massive sort of Eastern European contingent around where I work, so Romanians, Poles. So yeah, all of that gets thrown into the melting pot as well. And it leads to a lot of stories, a lot of gemmed jobs. Quite a lot of them were actual ones. So it's stuff that I've been to, not the big ones that the kiddie out by the river that she resuscitates. I've never done that, touch wood. But yeah, the little sort of like day-to-day ones that she does, quite a lot of them were based on experience. But I probably won't write another paramedic. I'm kind of skirting paramedic with Grace, because she's on the HEMS car. But doctors get to do far more than we do. So it still needs a load of research. She puts a chest tube in. We don't do chest tubes, so I have to research all that. And I tend to do doctors and then make a load of work for myself, because I have to look at another procedure just a second. I'm writing a surgeon in this one. Why the hell I decided to write a surgeon, I do not know. I know nothing about surgery. Yeah, it's just I don't know what. I just make work for myself, basically.
Is the research slightly easier, like doing the research on the police procedure and stuff? Does that become slightly easier because of your work background?
I think there's so much of that on telly as well. You just get used to that on telly. There's been some really good sort of gangland documentaries about some of the Great Manchester Police doing the gang investigations and the county lines drugs and stuff. And I'm putting that into the next one. So a lot of the time I will cheat and I'll watch a TV show and sit there and take notes, and that'll be part of my research. But yeah, I mean, we work hand in hand with the police a lot. I know quite a lot of officers that I can pick the brains of. And so you get that kind of, again, you get the dialogue and the way that they work and the way that they speak. But some of it, it is just made up. I don't know whether they call criminals perps. I haven't got a bloody clue. In fact, they probably don't, but they do in my books. I think that's probably, it's so difficult as well to sort of like separate what's British and what's American, because a lot of the stuff you're thinking, is that something that the Americans say? And I know, things like autopsy and postmortems. I'm sure I had Rosie saying something, what's the you know, when they read the Miranda, I'm sure I used the wrong word for that in Breathe, and then thought, oh shit, that's actually American. And that's from like Law and Order or something. So yeah, you have to be careful because it all gets mixed up. Yeah, I think there's so much American sort of language bleeds into British speak and wider speak all over the world that you forget where the line is and where, you know, it leaked into Britishisms basically. And we would say we'll go to the movies, you know, or the cinema, but you'd say, do you want to watch a movie? You wouldn't necessarily say, do you want to watch a film, sort of thing. So everything gets a little bit jumbled.
What about the food? Do readers contact you and say, so what's that? I've never heard of that before.
All the time. All the time. My characters have got terrible diets. They're all going to be diabetic. All of the teeth are going to fall out. Yeah, I get quite a lot of comments about the food. I think I put a menu up for something. I remember the Snowbound had its own menu on my blog just to explain like what a chip butty was and an egg custard and stuff and biscuit. So yeah, it probably a load of Americans wondering why the hell they're dipping biscuits into their tea, because a biscuit over there is something completely different to a biscuit over here. But yeah, it's something again that I've become known for, I think, because it's half the fun of reading my stuff is trying to work out what the hell the characters are eating. So, you know, Haribo. I don't know a paramedic who doesn't love Haribo. They will always have a bag, you know, and a night shift to keep them through a night shift. And it's little details like that, I think, that makes the writing fun. You can chuck some in. But yeah, Safia was fun for this one because I was researching all sorts and just making myself hungry, basically, researching like biryanis and chicken karahai. If I've said that wrong, is it karahai?
Yeah, karai, actually.
Karai, yeah. But yeah, and like got all these like Asian sweets and stuff, and I'm like, oh, those look really nice.
My last question is, what advice would you give to new writers?
Write, basically. Write what you like, I think. Don't be pressured into writing what you think people want to read. And I was reading a thread in a group on Facebook, and there was this girl who'd written, I think she'd written a spec fic. And she would basically, somebody had told her that nobody would ever read it, so, you know, don't bother publishing it. It's like, well, you've written it, you know, the idea of writing, I mean, I write for myself and I write for my wife, basically, first and foremost. But you always want somebody to read it. So if you've written it, you know, see if anybody wants to read it. Don't write yourself off because you've not written, you know, just something in a genre that is obviously going to sell. Romances sell. You know, those are your big heavy hitters in women love and women fiction. It is the romance. There's no bones about that. But that doesn't mean that people aren't asking for other genres. There are always people who want to read, you know, your thrillers and your science fiction, fantasy, steampunk. You know, this stuff will find a reader. And if it's just 10 readers, then it's better than you sitting on the manuscript and not doing anything with it. So yeah, write and write what you love, basically. You know, write for yourself and then see if anybody wants to read it. But don't be put off. Or don't be sort of like pigeonholed into something that you're not happy with because you want to sell. At the end of the day, I would like to read my stuff. I know I'm never going to make millions being an author. I'm not in it to make millions. This was never a money-making thing for me. You know, just, yeah. Say don't put yourself into a mold because you think that there isn't a reader outside of that mold. There are always readers out there, and they will find you, especially if you get, you know, somebody you can recommend you on. And that's the brilliant thing with lesbian fiction is the community. And you know, if somebody likes it, they tend to shout long and hard about it, and they will find readers for you.
So for this episode, This or That, we do a little twist. It's the UK twist. So I will mispronounce, and I don't know what I'm saying, but the answer should be fun. So This or That, scone or chocolate digestive?
Well, congratulations for saying scone right, for a start. Thumbs up for that. There's a huge scone or scone thing over here, but I am definitely on the scone side. Scone, I think, although I do like both.
Haribo or Bakewell?
How can you do that to me?
I don't know.
Oh, Haribo. Just.
Exotic tea or Builder's tea?
Builder's tea. Builder's tea all the time. None of that frou crap. Herby.
Snowdonia or Swiss Alps?
All my life. The mountains in Wales will just be a Swiss Alps there. Always. I love it there.
Sheep socks or sheep's beanie?
Beanie.
Blue tits or blue boobies?
That's come from Sarah. I'm guessing all of these have come from Sarah.
Yes, indeed.
Well, given that I'm currently not hand raising, but single-handedly raising half the blue tits in the dark peak, I think I'll have to say blue tits there, even though the boobies are fun.
Okay. A gravy or custard?
Oh, gravy.
Gravy.
Yeah, not on the same thing. Obviously, I won't put custard on my chips. But yeah, gravy. I'm more of a gravy person.
And one last one. And remember, I live in Quebec, Canada.
Oh, God.
Which of the British colony is the best?
Well, might have to think.
Remember where I live. I'm not pressuring you.
Could it be anything, that bit above America? What's that bit called? Let's just say your bit. Your colony.
It's okay. So, that was it. Thank you very much for your time.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for chatting to us. Yeah, and we're really looking forward to reading the book.
Yes. Do pick it up. It's out in October, so not long to wait.
So it's 1st October on the BSB site and then 12th October everywhere else.
Yeah, Bold Strokes have it on ebook and paperback on the 1st, so they get exclusivity for 12 days, and then it's out everywhere else, so Amazon and the rest.
So just before we wrap up, do you have a message for your readers?
Have fun with it. You might need a stiff drink or a nice brew or both. But do let me know what you think.